So, Jesus has been teaching and healing people, and crowds are coming to him from all over the area. They're bringing all their sick friends to be healed and coming to hear what Jesus has to say. And Jesus looks out and he sees all these people, and he decides that he is going to take some time to teach them and tell them wonderful things about what it means to follow him. So he goes up on the mountain a little ways, and he turns around and he starts to share with them. He says, there's some people in the world who are looked down upon. Let's say these are the poor people. These are the meek people. These are the people who try to make peace. These are the people who are persecuted and looked down upon. But you know what? These are actually the people that God is for. And God is going to satisfy the people who are hungry and thirsty for righteousness. He is going to give the earth as an inheritance to the people who are meek. He is going to comfort the people who mourn. All of the people in bad situations, God is going to meet and is going to provide for and reveal himself to. And Jesus says that if you are persecuted for my name, if people do mean things to you and call you names and harm you because you're a follower of me, you are blessed. And you know what? In the old days, there used to be people who followed God. They were called prophets, and they would go around and share what God had to say to the people, and they were so hated, and they were harmed, and they were killed, and they were just so many bad things happened to them. And Jesus is saying, those are actually the people that you want to be like. Those are the people who followed God, and you want to be like that, somebody who follows God. And so don't worry if somebody is harming you because you're following me, because I am showing you the way of life. And he says, you know what? You people who follow me, you are like salt. Salt has an amazing quality that just makes the world so much better in so many ways. And if you are salt and you decide, you know what? This persecution that's happening to me makes me not want to be salt anymore. I'm going to not be salty. Then you are pretty much worthless. If you had some salt in your cupboard and you poured it in your soup and it didn't make your soup salty, then you would just throw it away. And Jesus is saying that's the same way with people who follow me. I want you to be the salt that I created you to be. And if you stop being salty, you're not worth anything. He also says that people who follow Jesus are like a light. You usually use a light to see. So you turn on the light and then you do your stuff. You don't turn on the light and then close the door so you can't see it. You don't take your flashlight and hide it under your bed where it's not helpful. You use the light. And also not only that, where you shouldn't hide the light and you shouldn't hide who you are actually like a city on a hill that cannot be hidden. Everybody sees the city on the hill, and its light just radiates for miles around because it can be seen. And so that is what you are like if you're somebody who follows me, Jesus says. Now, I'm going to take a quick pause here because this passage is pretty long. And so there's going to be a lot that's difficult for me to remember as I'm retelling it. This passage that I'm telling you today comes from Matthew chapters 5, 6, and 7. So please go check it out after this video and see if there's anything that I may have missed or added on accident as I'm retelling the story. So back to the story. Jesus says, I am not here to change the old ways. In the past, God told you how you should live your life, and I'm not here to tell you differently. In fact, I uphold and agree with everything that God told you in the past. But let me tell you something maybe you haven't thought of before. Let's start off with the topic of murder. Now, in the past, God said don't murder. And like I said, I am totally for that. Don't murder anybody. Totally approve. But I'm going to add to that. Because you see, when you're angry at somebody, you want them to die and you are upset with them, and that is not okay. That's actually just as bad as murdering somebody. And Jesus says, there's some words that you're not allowed to call people. And if you call people these words, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. And you might have to go to court and things, so don't use those words. Also, I'm going to tell you, even if you say to your brother, you fool, you are in danger of the fires of hell. So don't do that. Like, be kind in your heart towards the people around you and be at peace with the people around you. You should always do your best to be at peace with everyone. And so much so, like, it's a good thing to go to church and worship God. But if you're in church and you're worshiping and you're giving your money and all the things, and you remember, oh wait, there's this person in my life who is kind of upset with me about something. Jesus says you should stop. You should leave church. You should go make a phone call. You should go and be at peace with that person before you come back to worship God. Because it is more important to be at peace with the people around you than to be appearing holy by going to church. Jesus also says that if somebody takes you to court, you should figure out what their problem is and try to be reconciled with them before you even get to court. Because you may be able to work things out and then you wouldn't have to go to court. And that would be so much better. After talking about being at peace with people, Jesus goes on to talk about adultery and sleeping around with people who are not your spouse. And he says, you know what? In the old law that you had before, you were told not to do that. Don't sleep around with somebody that you're not married to. But I tell you even more than that. I tell you that even if you look at somebody with the intention of lusting or fantasizing after them, you actually have already committed adultery with them in your heart. And don't do that. That's not okay. And Jesus says, even if you're married, you should be faithful to the person you're married to. And he says that in the old law, you were allowed to divorce somebody if you gave them a certificate of divorce. So that's good. If you want to cut ties, you should definitely tell the person you're cutting ties and not just ghost them. But Jesus is saying more than that even if you divorce somebody and then they go marry somebody else, you've actually caused them to be an adulterer. And somebody who marries that divorced person becomes an adulterer. He says, don't do that. That's not cool. Jesus also says about adultery that it is so important not to lust that you should do whatever it takes to not lust. He says, his example is very extreme. And he says, if your eye causes you to sin, you should take it out. And he says, if your hand causes you to sin, you should cut it off. Because it is better to go into heaven where God is and be with God than to be separated from God forever because you didn't want to part with something that you were that was causing you to sin. So I'm not saying you should go start cutting up your body, but Jesus is saying that it's so important to follow him and follow God, that if there's anything in your life that is hindering you from following God, you should do whatever means necessary to get rid of that thing in your life. And then Jesus talks about promises and oaths and swearing. And he says, you might say, I swear on the Bible that this is true, or I swear on the holy temple in Jerusalem that this is true, or I swear by heaven that this is true. And Jesus says, don't do that. Heaven is where God is, and the earth is his footstool. And why are you swearing by those things? Instead of swearing, you should just be an honest person. Be a person who has a character of honesty so that everybody knows when you say yes, you mean yes. And when you say no, you mean no. And then you won't need to swear because people will know that you speak honestly. Jesus also says, in the past, there was a saying that there's an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. So if somebody hits me in the eye, I can hit him in the eye. And Jesus says, no, that is not the way you should go. I want your hearts to be loving towards each other. And I want you to be at peace, as I already said. And if somebody hits you on one cheek, I want you to turn to him the other cheek and let him have a hit on that side. And if somebody forces you to go 2 miles with him, I want you to go 4 miles with him. If somebody sues you and takes your cloak, then give him your coat as well. Be at peace with everybody. Jesus says that you should love and pray for your enemies. He says the people who harm you, you should be kind to them. And the people who hate you, you should pray for them. And you should try to be at peace with them, and you should wish for good things for their life. He also says, you know what? Sometimes people think like I am only going to say hello to that person if they say hello to me. And Jesus says, everybody does that. Like of course you say hello to the people who say hello to you. But I want you to do even more. I want you to be more loving and more kind and more generous than the people around you. So I want you to go and I want you to say hello and greet people who normally wouldn't give you the time of day and normally totally ignore you. Jesus also talks about, you know what? There's some people in the world who like to make a big show when they give money. They love to be seen. Maybe they leave their check face up in the offering plate while it goes by, or they talk about their giving. They say, you know what? I didn't take the standard deduction on my taxes this year. I itemized my deductions. What did you do? And they make a big deal about their giving. And really what they're doing is they're trying to make themselves look better instead of just giving for the sake of making the world better and for honoring God. So they've changed it. So it's not about honoring God. It's just about honoring themselves. And Jesus says, don't do that. When you give, you should not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. Your giving should be done in secret, only between you and God will reward you. You may not feel like you're getting a reward because nobody says, oh, you're so cool, but God is going to reward you. He says the same thing about prayer. You know what? Some people stand on the street corners and make a big deal about their prayers, or they pray long and eloquently and going on and on. And Jesus says, no, don't do that. When you're doing that, you are praying so that you will be honored. But your prayers should be to honor God. So pray secretly. Pray in your closet where no one can see you and no one can hear you. And pray humbly before God. And trust that God is going to hear you because he really does hear you. Some people think that they're going to be heard by God because they say the right things or because they pray on and on. But God hears us and he loves us and he is going to hear our prayers just when we pray humbly and honestly before him. And Jesus goes on to give a very specific example about how to pray. He says, you know what? This is how you should pray. You should pray, God, my Father in heaven, I pray that your name would be made holy in all the earth. And I pray that your kingdom would come, and I pray that your will would be done. I know that your kingdom and your will is done in heaven, and I pray that in that same way it would be done here on the earth. And I pray that you would provide for me everything that I need for today. And I choose to forgive the people who have sinned against me, and I ask that you also would forgive me. And Jesus says, that's it. That's how you should pray, simply and humbly and honestly. And Jesus says it's very important that you forgive the people who have hurt you, because if you do not forgive the people who have hurt you, then God also will not forgive you. And Jesus talks about fasting. He says, you know what? Some people, when they fast, they make a really big deal about it. They don't put any makeup on and they look tired and hungry and they tell people they're tired and hungry and they're like, hey, I'm fasting. I'm fasting. Do you mind not eating that cracker in front of me? And Jesus is saying, don't do that. Like, your fast should be humble and your fast should be between you and God. Because same thing with giving and praying, your fast should be between you and God, and your fast should be to honor God and not to honor yourself. And Jesus says, you know what, when you do these things, if you're praying for other people to see you, or if you're giving for other people to see you, or if you're fasting for other people to see you, what you're doing is you're trying to build a kingdom for yourself here on the earth, and you are ignoring the kingdom of heaven. And he says, don't do that, like for a lot of reasons. But for example, if you're worried about money, for example, and you want to save a lot of money because you're worried about the future or whatever, Jesus says, don't worry. Like, you can put all your money in a bank account, or you could put your money in a safe deposit box, or you can have a fireproof safe in your house, and you can store your money in those places. But you know what? Sometimes people's identities get stolen, and sometimes there's robbers who steal from the bank, and sometimes houses burn down and the fireproof safes don't work out so well. And Jesus is saying, If you live for the things on this earth, the things on this earth are going to pass away. So instead of that, you should live for the kingdom of heaven, and you should strive for the kingdom of heaven, because in heaven, there are no robbers to rob the bank. And there's no people who steal your identities. And there's no moths or rust, because like gold and things can like get rusty and go bad, and moths could eat away at something precious. But in heaven, those things are not there. And if you are working and striving for the kingdom of heaven, you will never lose what you have built or strived for. And Jesus says, don't worry. I know that if you're seeking after the kingdom of heaven, you might feel like God is not noticing you and God is not going to take care of you because you have real physical needs on the earth. And Jesus says, you know what? Take a moment and pause and think about the birds. They fly around and do their things, and they don't worry, and they trust that God is going to feed them every single day. And God does. And another example, clothes. We all need clothes. They protect us. They keep us out of the elements, and they're very good to have. And Jesus says you need those, and God knows that you need those. But think about for a minute the grass of the field. Think about a lily. A lily is just a piece of grass. But God saw that it needed clothes, and he gave it beautiful, glorious, splendid clothes. In fact, Jesus says, the clothes on the lily of the field that's going to wither tomorrow, those clothes are more glorious and more splendid than the wisest and richest man who ever lived. So don't worry. God is going to take care of you every single day. And you might feel like, tomorrow I have this thing, or tomorrow I need to work for this thing. What am I going to do tomorrow? And Jesus says, don't worry about tomorrow. God is going to take care of you today, and he's going to take care of you today, and he's going to take care of you today. And don't worry about tomorrow, because when tomorrow becomes today, God is going to take care of you today. So trust God, and he will provide for all of your needs. So I'm going to take a moment to pause in this story. Jesus is saying so many things in this story. And as you're hearing this story and as you go back and read it for yourselves, think about, what does this passage teach you about God? And what does this passage teach you about humanity? And is there anything in your life that needs to change because of this story? You may also feel like there's somebody in your life who needs to hear this story, or somebody that you want to share this story with for whatever reason. So go and share it with them and tell them and ask them those questions. What does this teach them about humanity and about God? I feel like there's so many things that we can learn from the Bible, and we don't always learn it ourselves. And it's so good to share ideas and share what we're learning. So share with your friends, share in the comments below what you're learning. I would love to know how this passage is impacting your own life. So jumping back into the passage, Jesus goes on to talk about judging. He says, I've just given you a lot of information about how you should live your life and how your heart should be the thing that you're worried about, not your outward appearance, and your relationship between you and God should be the thing that you worry about, not if people think you're amazing. So I want to make sure that you are not judging others. Because you know what? If you judge other people, you are going to be judged by God with the same standards that you judge other people. So don't do that. And Jesus says, you know what? If you're judging somebody, it's like you see they have a little tiny speck of sawdust in their eye, and you want to help them take that out. And Jesus says, you know what? That's like kind of a good thing to do, but the truth is, actually, you have like a flake in your own eye, and you can't even see to help your friend take the speck out of their eye. So before you go and try to help your friend do better with their life, make sure your own life is clean. Make sure you're following God, and that you're not telling somebody you follow God in this way when all the time you're not following God in the same way you told them to follow God. Jesus says, no, that's stupid. Don't do that. So Jesus says another thing that I don't really understand how it fits into the rest of what he's saying. So let me know what you think. He says that you should not cast your pearls before pigs because they'll trample on them. Not sure if that's related to the judgment or what comes next. Let me know what you think. And then Jesus says, Ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be opened. He says God loves you and cares about you and wants you to have the things that you need. And you know what? If there was a father on earth and his son came to him and said, Dad, I'm hungry. Can I please have some bread and maybe a fish? That the dad would give that to his son. The dad would not give the son a stone or a snake. Instead, the son asked for food, good, wholesome food to help them live. And the father's going to do that. And so when you're asking and seeking after God's kingdom and asking for God to care about your needs, God is going to provide that for you. And he's not going to be mean or cruel. Jesus says you should treat other people the way that you want to be treated. And he says, you know what? There is a path to the kingdom of heaven. And the door to the path is really narrow. And not very many people find it. But there's a great, big, broad path that leads to destruction. And a lot of people are going that way. So be careful, be honest, be kind, be humble. Seek after God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And you will find him. Do it. And Jesus' final words to this crowd of people around him are about false prophets. He says, you know what, there's going to be people who come to you and they say they come in God's name, but really they are not coming in God's name. What they're like is like a wolf that dresses up in sheep's clothes and it like hangs out with the sheep and like makes friends with the sheep, but really it's there to eat the sheep. And Jesus says, how are you going to know a false prophet when you see one? Well, let me tell you. When a tree is healthy and good and flourishing, it produces good fruit. And you can eat it and be satisfied and you're like, wow, this fruit is amazing. But when a tree is unhealthy and diseased and sick, it produces bad fruit. And you eat that fruit, you probably don't even eat the fruit. You like pick it up and you smell it and like it looks kind of wrinkly, you know, like, I'm not going to eat that. It will probably make me very sick. So you throw it out. And Jesus is saying that's how you will know a false prophet. You can look at their life and you can see, are they doing good things or bad things? Are they obeying what they're teaching? Are they obeying these things that I just spent the past 3 chapters telling you? Or are they doing their own thing? Are they the hypocrites who say, you've got like a speck of dust in your eye, but like they have a big long plank in their own eye? That's how you'll know if they're a false prophet. And Jesus says these false prophets on the last day, they are going to cry out and they're going to say, Lord, Lord, we did good things in your name. We did miracles in your name. We healed the sick. We did miracles. We cast out demons in your name, Jesus. Why are you not accepting us? And God is going to say on that day, I never knew you. In fact, what you were like somebody who heard all of my words and had the right ideas in your mind, but you took those ideas and you didn't obey them. Whoever designs the plans to build the house and make it stable, God is saying, that's what I'm like. I'm the person teaching you how to build a house. And a false prophet is somebody who hears those things and understands them and knows them, and then they go and they build their house like in the sand on the beach. Just on the beach, like no foundation, nothing, just like some sticks in the beach. And the waves just wash up and over it, and it just washes out to sea. Jesus is saying that's what it's like when somebody hears my words and does not put them into practice. And he says instead, the reverse of that is somebody who hears my words and obeys them and puts them into practice in every area of their life. He says that's like somebody who hears and understands how to build a house and then goes and builds it the right way. And the crowds hear these things and they're like, wow, Jesus is amazing. He says like the most amazing things. And he teaches us like somebody who has authority and power, not like our teachers of the law. Maybe they're false prophets. And they're just so excited by all the things that Jesus had to tell them.